Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, we are talking about immigration, the rights of students, and the rights of educators. We've got an immigration expert on the show today to talk about what you need to know under this next presidency.
The ACSA legislative lunch break starts now.
And it's a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA's executive director. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA's senior director of marketing and communications. Welcome. We are honored to have you with us today. Go ahead and jump onto the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from today. Edgar, how are you?
2024 is sprinting here to the end. It's going a little too quick. I'm starting to feel like that holiday angst, I guess, if we will. I know we've talked about this a lot. You know, I've been accused of being a little bah humbug, but you know, I won't go there. It's just, I think right now, it's just I'm so surprised that we're at this point. I think because Thanksgiving was later. I don't know what it is, but yeah, a couple more weeks, and I know our folks are looking forward to having some weeks off from school and whatnot. So yeah, here a sprint to the end. A lot going on. Yes, we're going to talk about literally by the minute. And so that obviously top of mind, just our topic today. I'm excited about our guest, and I'll talk about her here in a second. But yeah, so looking forward to the show.
Yeah. And this gives me an opportunity to remind everyone our holiday show is next week. So that's when Edgar and I are the most festively dressed for the entire year. So we invite you to join us in the festive clothing during our broadcast next week. We'll be talking about budget prediction, so that will come next week. Want to say hello to some of our viewers that are here. Neri is first one in on the chat. Jared Hungerford with us as well. So welcome. Good to have you guys. Couple of news headlines, and Edgar mentioned just off the top, we are following a little bit of breaking news reporting wise that we'll get to. And it speaks to the guests that we have on today to talk about immigration, but we'll bring that to you in just a second. First off, we've talked so much, Edgar, about affordable housing for educators in our school communities. Some districts taking some of the surplus land that they have, some districts taking that area where old schools used to be and converting those over to affordable housing. There's a story from the San Diego Union Tribune today that San Diego Unified is considering the construction of 1,000 income-restricted housing units. Now, the UT is reporting that the units could house up to 10% of the employees in the district in the next 10 years. Now, the current proposal has San Diego Unified building the units in 5 current sites. And those units would be a combination of moderate income housing for employees whose families earn between 80 and 120% of the county's median income. And then low income units would be available for those making 60% of the median income or less. One school board member is advocating for construction of housing for students and families in need. According to this story, quote, providing homes and affordable housing for our students is aligned more with our goals and guardrails as a district. I do want to point out, Edgar, that our friends over at Twin Rivers Unified, which is in the Sacramento area, announced yesterday their plans for new housing specifically for its employees. So a lot of districts, Edgar, again, we've talked about it. Affordable housing is so important for getting teachers into the teaching pipeline in some of these districts. And we know in San Diego, they pay you in sunshine over there. But this is a big deal for San Diego Unified to be able to have a plan to build 1,000 units.
Yeah, pretty innovative in terms of just what districts are having to do now to get at the heart of it. It's a pipeline issue, right? That getting some incentive to go have people go into the profession, sometimes the barrier in some of our nicest areas in the state, also sometimes are some of our most expensive. San Diego, I know the Bay Area, we hear this issue. Frankly, it's hard to find an area where this isn't a topic about just affordable housing. So as you can see, just this is another example of folks thinking outside the box and how can they try to get at these pipeline issues them directly and reduce one barrier maybe to get folks into the classroom.
Yeah. Also want to mention, and this is specifically for our members, our viewers over in the Fresno County area, and just want to get your feedback on this, Edgar. Nearly 75% of Fresno County students are eligible for money for college, free money for college, but they haven't claimed it yet. They may not even know that they're eligible for it. There's more than $84 million available from CalKids, which is a state initiative designed to help low-income families save money for college. Every eligible child could receive up to $1,500 of money for college. There's an online application available. Students and families obviously need to know about it, Edgar. But I mean, this money for college, we are going to kind of address some of the challenges with the incoming presidential administration and maybe how that impacts FAFSA, but at least this money is available right now.
Yeah, this is all interconnected now. I mean, I think it's unfortunate, and especially when we talk about accessibility to higher education, when there's resources out there, how are we getting our students to take the most advantage of that? Obviously, like you just alluded to, Naj, I think this is connected to this bigger conversation now that we're about to discuss. Is we've been having some conversations here in California with Dr. Daisy Gonzalez, the executive director of the Student Aid Commission. And this is one of the issues they're very concerned about, given the new administration. They had already been seeing some dips in certain communities in terms of students applying for financial aid, coupled with here in California, who have this requirement that all kids fill out the FAFSA now in the high school, something that ACSA, frankly, has been pushing on. So this is just yet another challenge where if you're in communities, and where I know we'll ask Namita this question, what do folks do, right? Because in some cases you have communities say, well, if I fill out an application and depending on their documentation status, what is going to be the interaction there, or that information getting to the federal government and whatnot. So it's a tricky issue. I know I will say it's one that we are going to take a proactive account for here, not just on the advocacy end, but frankly, on trying to give some resources. I'm excited about some of the work that we're going to do with the Student Aid Commission of really trying to maybe even put some resources on the ground, giving some folks some tools who may be experiencing some of these challenges of students filling out financial aid. And it's not just financial aid, right? It goes to everything, our meal forms, anything, any public information, which we'll get into. It's another reality of this new world that we thought was old world, but as we're about to talk about, there's some, even when we thought like, okay, we've dealt with the administration, we kind of know what's to come. I'll say this right off the bat, Naj, and I think you'd agree. We've tried to take a very measured tone here in the wake of the election. And as we said, I think the day after the election, that our job here at ACSA is to advocate for students regardless of who's in office, right? And that we were going to look for opportunities to collaborate with new administration, with new congressional leadership in DC. And that's still the case. With that said, we're going to take a very hard line, a hard stance when there is either policy or narrative. Today, but we're going to talk about some narrative that is already having some ripple effects on our communities, on our school leaders, on our students, and that's not partisanship. I think that's just what's in the best interests of our kids, and that's going to be our goal and our intent.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to discuss, and I want to remind folks, we've heard feedback from many people, ACSA members, educators outside of ACSA, that have said, we need some resources when it comes to immigration, when it comes to students, undocumented students. Where can I find those resources? They are available on the ACSA Resource Hub. So if you would like some resources, if you have some questions, if you need some content, there is some that's available there on the ACSA Resource Hub. We had mentioned at the top of the show, Edgar, about a little bit of breaking news from some reporting from NBC. NBC News is reporting this morning, President-elect Trump is planning to scrap the policy restricting ICE agents at what are called sensitive locations, churches, hospitals, and schools specifically, and it could happen on day one of his presidency. Now, there has been a policy in place since 2011 that prevented ICE agents from arresting immigrants at these sensitive locations without approval from supervisors, ICE supervisors. And those approvals came when there was a national security threat or terror issue. But this change, according to NBC, is intended to increase ICE's authority to arrest migrants. So let's go ahead and bring in our guest today. Namita Brown is a partner over at Fagan Friedman Fulfrost, F3 Law, for those of you who've been in the education business for some time. Namita joins us right now. And Namita, we just kind of gave some details on that, the stripping of policies for the so-called sensitive locations. What if Immigration Customs Enforcement, or ICE, or other authorities visit school campuses? What are administrators' rights when it comes to protecting students?
Okay, so thank you first for having me, and it's a pleasure to talk about this issue because it's impacting so many schools and operations. I want to start with just from the outset saying that this discussion is not about changing the immigration status of any student, any family, or anything like that. It's more about operationally, how do we make sure that any agents coming on our campus don't disrupt the student experience that kids may have, whether they're in an elementary school or in a secondary school. And with this breaking news that you highlighted, the policy would say that there are these sensitive areas where we don't normally go in and do any kind of enforcement action, has existed as a nonpartisan memo since 2011. It existed. There was a lot of fear around this memo in 2017 as well, when we saw the surgence of the ICE raids and all of that. But they adhered to what the memo said, which is, we are not going into schools, we are not going into hospitals, we're not going into churches unless there are exigent circumstances. Mm-hmm. And what those exigent circumstances are things like if there is an actual terroristic threat, if there is an active terrorist-related investigation, and there is reasonable cause, good cause to go into those sensitive areas and disrupt them. Those are the exigent circumstances that have always allowed ICE agents to come on school grounds, and it has existed before this administration. So this proposal of a reversal of policy basically says that that exigent circumstance exception that existed is now watered down. It doesn't exist as an exigent circumstance. It just exists as, oh, well, we do not want to disrupt, but we have the authority to go into schools. So you don't have to have a terroristic threat. You don't have to have a search warrant, and all of the things that we have basically advised school districts in California, which is have a policy, have a process when there is federal immigration enforcement coming onto your campus, make them sign in as a visitor, check what kind of documents they have, check to see what kind of subpoena they have, what kind of warrant they have. That can be watered down if this policy were to go into effect. And basically, it could be a free-for-all. Mm. Now, I do want to point out that California Legislature has AB 49 introduced, that was brought on, I think, introduced on December the 2nd, which does have some kind of limitations around when an ICE agent can come on campus. But if this is federal policy, bottom line is federal law is going to trump state law on issues of immigration. So it's breaking news. It is going to be, it's going to require a complete shift in what we've been advising districts, because all the parameters that were sort of holding on to make sure that our student experience was uninterrupted, undisrupted, the guardrails may fall off. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a tough few weeks to sort of get accustomed to what the policy is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Namita, I know you've talked about Friends of ACSA here. I've lost count on how many different forums we've had you on here recently, trying to make sense of all the changes, whatnot. So I'm going to ask you, So first of all, thank you on behalf of our members for just being in front and just, helping us try to make sense of this changing landscape. So I'm going to ask you an obvious question. I think what you just said, but I think because I'm going to underscore the protection as we've been concerned and whatnot, our backstop has been, well, but there is some policies that might protect us, what you just talked about. So given this news report, and it's just that, right? And we'll see what happens on the political front and the reaction, both partisan and hope maybe bipartisan, I hope. But having said all that, we'll see where this goes. What would your level of concern be here? If this would turn into federal policy, where do we go from here?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I worry about are two parallel things. There is the student experience, kids coming to school. And I really worry about, when you're looking at terroristic threats and all of that, that exception has always existed. But young secondary school kids, is this going to de-incentivize them from coming to school if they have a mixed status family or if they are undocumented kids? So that is one piece. The other piece that I worry about is, California school budgeting, California school business is founded on the concept of local control, of parent engagement, of this notion that as part of LCAP, we listen to different voices and create and curate student-related experiences, curriculum, and all of that. And so are parents going to be afraid to participate in this local control process that we've had, this voice of parents that is so necessary? Are they going to be afraid to be part of any kind of planning that districts do with respect to how kids go through K-12 and the student experience that they engage in? How are we going to deal with students and parents who are going to be afraid to come into pickup line? I mean, to pick up their kids from school. I mean, these are the practical realities. The bottom line is we've learned from 2017 that when you have a rumor, it takes off like fire. And now we are actually having credible sources, news sources like the NBC, which is a major news conglomerate, talking about there is going to be no safe haven. So, districts in 2017 went into churches to have LCAP meetings because they were aware that perhaps this is a safe space where ICE would not come in and we would be able to interact with our students, interact with our parents. I really worry about where that cross-pollination of ideas between parents and districts is going to occur. I suspect there's going to be a lot of pivoting to some kind of a virtual board, but I worry about our fundamental model where there is this parent and the home to school partnership model that we have adopted in California, where parents are an essential part of the student school experience. How is that going to work from here on out? And I also worry about our enrollment. Like, what is going to happen to our ADA? Are we going to see, if this news really breaks, are we going to see a mass exodus? And maybe, and I'm just saying this is purely speculative. Are we going to see kids go off on holiday and not come back from the winter holiday, the winter break? Those are real issues, and districts, as we are dealing with, just trying to level off post-COVID, where we are getting our footing back with enrollment and ADA, what are we going to do? What do we need to do in order to protect districts from yet another fiscal cliff, which is going to happen in terms of student engagement and student enrollment?
Namita Brown is a partner with F3 Law. She is with us right now. If you have any questions for Namita, go ahead and put those into the chat. Also want to point out to you, we talked briefly about that 2011 policy. We have a link right now in our chat if you want to take a look at that 2011 policy at the end of the show. Namita, you said a couple of things. First, you said federal law trumps state law. You also said, this is going to require a complete shift in what we've been telling districts. Let me go back to that federal law piece, because the California Legislature is holding a special session when it comes to undocumented students. So now that you have said federal law trumps state law, what do school leaders need to know about the basic legal rights of undocumented students in California? And is a special session even going to be substantive if federal law does trump state law?
So
I know I gave you like 50 questions there.
no. I'm a lawyer. I parse words for a living. So I'm going to say there are areas of the law where federal government has more oversight and more authority than state governments. And so federal immigration has always been part of the federal government's domain. They are the ones who make visa categories. They are the ones who make policy around DACA students. Now, there are states' rights that come into play, but with respect to what kind of rights around immigration that exists, that generally is within the purview of federal government. And that's why I say federal law will trump state law on most of these immigration-related issues. In California, and currently, the law is you cannot ask a person, a student, for their citizenship or their status before you enroll a student in. And so as many districts are starting their enrollment processes, kindergarten enrollment is beginning, they're having fairs all over the place. One of the things that we have to do internally as school districts is work with our site administrators, as well as our classified staff, who are the first line of defense when new parents come onto school grounds, to say, look, you are not asking for birth certificates. You're not asking for passport information. What you really want is you need something that verifies the age of the kid. You need something that verifies where the student lives to verify residency. There are different ways and different documents that can suffice for purposes of that particular data point that we need to enroll kids. So what hasn't changed is, the law that says that you don't have to be established as an American citizen to get enrolled in schools. That has not changed. And what we need to do is make sure that we are training our staff to understand that, and maybe also doing active PD to disseminate some of the additional alternate forms that can be used and documents that can be used to comply with basic enrollment information. I want to point out that the Attorney General's office has put out a very helpful packet that actually outlines all of those alternate documents that can be used. And I will say to you, as district administrators, I would use forms that have been put out there as a resource to you instead of sitting and creating new forms on your own. The wheel exists. Don't spend your resources recreating the wheel. Utilize that, and utilize the opportunity to tell your staff that you're not creating new policies at this time. This is the current law. This law has already existed. There are new guidelines from the Attorney General around alternative documentation availability, and you are just bringing that to the forefront. What you don't want is to create this into being a political issue when really it is more of an administrative issue, and the law and the Attorney General's office is giving you additional guidance on what can suffice for purposes of enrollment.
Namita,
so that was one of your 50 questions.
I did a pretty good job. Like you said, you parsed those words. And
even I lost track of like the second question I asked. So no problem.
One of the things, and obviously the caveat, Namita, is that this is what we have now, laws now. We'll see what happens on day one, and then we'll respond to the changes. But as of now, what are schools required to collect in terms of information, in terms of immigration status? You already alluded to this. And would they have to hand over a student data as part of any request?
Yeah. So here is another trumping. Trump as in takes precedence. FERPA is still the law of the land. So student educational records still have a high interest of privacy. So you're not turning over a CUME file to any immigration officer unless there is a valid subpoena or a valid court order. And those will happen when you have a terroristic threat related issues. So what I want to be very clear, one of the other rumor that is happening is when parents bring in their kids to enroll in school districts, whatever documents you take, whatever data that you take, that is going to be turned over to the federal government. That is not happening. There is nothing right now that requires that transfer of information to happen. All of that stuff is still protected under FERPA, and FERPA has not, been carved up to create any kind of exception based upon immigration status. So I want to be sure that people recognize that just because somebody comes in, enrolls in the school, and parents show their IDs and parents disclose the fact that they may be an undocumented family, that automatically is not being turned over to federal government. The place where I think there are two other places where we are hearing a lot of concerns. One is around how you opt in for free and reduced lunch. Again, you're not collecting data, you are actually looking at stuff, and you can, based upon the documents that are presented to you, you can check and say that this person qualifies for free and reduced lunch. So there is that. You're not officially collecting data for that particular purpose. You can examine it, make sure that the person meets the threshold requirements, and you can just fill out the documents or the form that will allow them to avail themselves of the free and reduced lunch. So that is one of the pieces. The other piece is, in terms of FAFSA, you have high school kids who are afraid that they would have to disclose their parents' status with respect to, and their own status with respect to student aid. And that is a real concern. And I know that there is a lot of work that is being done on the legislative side at this point. But one of the things that I'm facing, or I'm getting a lot of questions upon from districts, is counselors want to send out email notifications to families saying, we cannot guarantee that this is going to be kept private. Just note that any documents or any emails that a counselor is sending out to any student is not a student record. It is a public record. And after the fact, if somebody is reading that email, there can be a perception that you were trying to hide or trying to give them legal advice on status-related issues. And so I just warn you, in terms of good accounting and being good stewards of public monies, we are not in a place where we are advising people on what to do with respect to immigration-related issues. What we are saying to them is FAFSA is going to be one of the documents that requires you to upload your federal tax returns and state tax returns, and it is a federal form. And so there might be a disclosure of your status, your undocumented student status. And so you've got to be mindful. But what I don't want districts to do is take it upon themselves to give legal advice, because I think that is beyond the scope of any educator and beyond the scope of the work that we do. We are in school districts, we are not advocacy organizations. That is the work of ACSA, that is the work of CSBA, that is the work of the legislature as they create policies. But districts, as public employees, we are required to follow law, and the law is that these are the documents that get uploaded and they go to the Fed. There is disclosure to the feds about it, and you just have to be mindful. And I also want to point out that you don't want to be viewed as dissuading kids from applying on FAFSA either. I mean, it's a slippery slope. There is no good answer here. I'm just warning you where the pitfalls are, because we do not know what laws are going to come into existence, and I don't want to create a situation where a administrator or a school district personnel is being disciplined for trying to create trying to create carve-outs that don't currently exist in the law. That may be disciplined down the road. I mean, these are all speculative but real-time concerns that districts are dealing with, personnel, HR people are dealing with, school site folks are dealing with, school secretaries are dealing with. And I would just think that we would want to have a process that is clean, that helps parents understand that we are not going to out them in many ways. We are not sharing student data. We're not sharing student records. And that with respect to FAFSA, it's a risk.
And Namita, since we are just crossing the bottom of the hour here, I do want to let you go, but let me ask you this, and I might sound like I'm generalizing here, but often governments, put in a policy and then just kind of figure it out after that. There's a level of training that's required here. Do you have a message right now that we've given you this information that came out today? Do you have a message out there to undocumented students, undocumented families, parents here in California that are worried about what life is going to be like over the next 3 to 4 months? Is there something that educators should be telling them?
I think what we want to communicate to our parents and students is that from a educator, California school perspective, educator focused perspective, California schools are going to be armed with policies and laws that the legislature is going to probably create during the session to really try to protect students. Districts are not going to put students in harm's way. We want to maintain families. We want to make sure students are educated, because that is the way out of climbing the social ladder. So we are working on that, but there are many great organizations, third-party organizations, that do nothing but advocate for students, for immigrant students, for DACAs, for Dreamers, all of that. And I would think that organizations like ACSA would be collaborating with them to create guideposts and partnerships to really advocate and create processes. I think for districts, the bottom line is whatever process we create, it has to be applied uniformly. It shouldn't matter that the immigrant family is, say, from Central America versus the immigrant family being from South Asia or Ukraine. We've got to have a process that is uniform, that does not discriminate based upon national origin or religion. And, it's going to be a fast evolving situation. So we've got to be on our toes and we've got to be nimble.
Namita, I have a whole page of notes here, so thank you. This helps us out a lot. Namita Brown, partner over at Fagan Friedman Full Frost, our good friends over at F3 Law. Namita, so good to have you here today. We look forward to having you next time.
All right, take care. Thank you so much.
Edgar, again, we brought you this NBC News reporting earlier today. I know you were taking in the information, kind of doing some analysis over the last 90 minutes or so as we gained information. After hearing what Namita had to say, is there a message right now, or is everything so fluid right now, especially with this coming out today, that we have to traditionally do what you have advocated for us to do, which is, hey, let's just take a breath?
Yeah, I think it's a balance, Naj. I think it is taking a breath, the old adage, and we'll see where this goes. And this is just, a report, and we'll have to let the politics play out. But with all that said, I'm even going to push back against my own, where I generally go on these topics is like, as we were talking, like this is new to us as well, is I think this does require the school community, and this is again not about partisanship and not about about anything that we've been trying to tread carefully on. That this is just bad for kids, this is bad for communities, this is bad for schools, regardless of documentation status, for all the reasons that Namita just talked about. As we sat here, so it's interesting how Namita talked about finding partners, collaboration. I'm texting some of my counterparts and some of the other organizations about like, hey, this is one where we're going to have to raise our voice on. We're going to have to push a little bit. I have some hopes, given the political state in DC and given what I think we watched this closely. I think folks on both sides of the aisle, this would typically be an issue that maybe even folks who took a hardline stance on immigration would say, hey, this is too far. For the reasons Namita talked about, this is a policy we can't go for. And under normal circumstances, I would hope, okay, there's even be some folks on the on the Republican side of the aisle who are gonna push back. I don't know that that's the case right now, just because of the politics of the day, and I think folks, generally speaking, are don't want to cross the incoming president. So I think it is going to be incumbent on a diversity of voices to explain why this would be so disruptive to schools, why this is not in the best interest of kids. I think we're going to do all the things Namita said, not only in providing resources, advocating when we need to, and trying to but also being very honest with our families. I mean, I think this is one place. This is not the message that everybody wants to hear. Like she said, we can't guarantee when they fill out a form that what's going to have there. I think we're going to do our best to put those protections. I'm sure the California Legislature will be responding to some of this. So I think it's a fine line of what's that, providing the resources, pushing back on where needed, but also having some tough conversations with our parents as well, and our families and our students. It's a tricky terrain. I'm hoping, as many things that have been thrown out there, that we're still in a position where this president hasn't taken office. So they're saying a lot of things. We'll see where we're at on day one. But I think it's incumbent on us to prepare, I think is the bottom line.
Yeah. And here at ACSA, we're going to continue to do the work to protect students. Coming up January 13th through 15th, our Every Child Counts Symposium. It is the largest professional development event that we put on here annually at ACSA. It's in San Diego. Here's a preview. Yeah, Edgar, that is always a conference you and I enjoy being at. For registration and information, go to ACSA.org/conferences. Also want to remind you about our Behind the Bills podcast. It's part of our ACSA podcast network. Right now, you can win a $200 Amazon gift card. Rate, review, and subscribe to Behind the Bills wherever you get your podcast. Send a screenshot of your review to behindthebills@ACSA.org. along with your name and contact information. You'll be entered to win a $200 Amazon gift card. I felt like a salesperson right there, Edgar. And there you go. There's a couple.
Yvonne will thank you for getting him a couple subscribers there, I think.
You know what? Yvonne should start making commercials. That's what that's what he should do. Also want to remind you of the entire ACSA podcast network. You can, of course, get the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break as a podcast. And then we've got our ACSA Leadership Classroom with our great interview with the former CEO of the Girl Scouts of California. So tune into that. That episode is out next Tuesday. Again, you can subscribe to the ACSA Leadership Classroom podcast. Those are your QR codes right there. Of course, if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we remind you to subscribe to us or like us on Facebook and YouTube. If you do, you will get instant alerts when we're about to come on with breaking news. And then, of course, a regular reminder for our normal Wednesday 1 p.m. show. And if you have great stories happening in your school communities, we want to tell those stories too. Go ahead and send in your talking points, your news releases, your photos to Michelle Carl, our EdCal editor, mcarl@axa.org. Next week's show, Edgar, buckle up. We're talking budget next week, budget predictions. The great Patty Herrera from School Services of California will be joining us. And Edgar,
I'm looking forward to your colorful getup as always.
I was just going to say, you'll be wearing your Christmas sweater. And had I actually planned this, maybe I would have a more festive Christmas holiday outfit than I will next week. But
Hey, there's still 7 days. There's 6
I know,
days
I know.
economy.
Amazon works quick. I know.
Yeah.
I know. Absolutely. Folks, thanks so much for being with us today on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays at 1 p.m. here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week. We'll see you next Wednesday.